Welcome to Chalk Talk. I'm Chris Love.
And I can do this with both hands.
Hey, looking good, John. I know last week your camera was tilted a little bit high. I'm not sure if everyone saw the sling on your arm, but you were incapacitated. It's good to see you looking a little better.
Yeah, I know that you guys only saw me in the sling for one day, probably about 20 minutes of one day, but I was actually in it for almost 5 weeks, so it feels pretty good. Still don't have that much mobility, but I can do that.
We'll get you back in your pullover Chalk Talk uniform soon enough.
Hopefully.
Have you ever wondered why it's so important to be a member of U.S. Sailing? We are all U.S. Sailing, from beginners to experts, from one-design sailors to offshore cruisers, and from instructor trainers to race officials. U.S. Sailing supports all types of sailors in countless ways. Where would sailing be without instruction and safety standards? Where would we be without Learn to Sail programs? Join or renew today to support these resources and ensure sailing remains a lifetime activity for everyone.
Well, John, I can say confidently you would have had trouble out there this past weekend. Did you read the regatta reports from around the Northeast?
Yeah, certainly conditions built for only those fit enough to sail. Pretty wild conditions. I know it shortened some regattas, specifically up in Nisa and Mesa. I know I had friends coaching and sailing both up in Nisa and then down in Mesa, especially at KP. I know they got blown out on Saturday, and the Dellenbaugh Women's Regatta, they got blown out for most of the day on Saturday. I know they got one pretty wild A division set in, and it was a pretty windy, wild weekend. Certainly looks like normal springtime conditions, early springtime conditions.
Yeah, hope everyone's got their dry suits all sealed up this spring. It's a wild start to the season now that the ice has thawed in some of these venues. But the team racing season, though, with the Marciando finishing up on the Charles, that's basically it. We now move on to conference champs. So I know our conference commissioner just sent out a reminder this week of the berths. Here they are: 4 from Nisa, 4 from Mesa, 2 from PCCSC, MCSA, and MCSA, and then 1 for CISA and NWICSA. And while different conferences have their conference champs at different times of the year, the 3 most competitive team racing districts, all on the East Coast, will be having their championships this weekend. So let's take a look. Going up the coast, starting with CISA, we've got 2 berths. I'd say College of Charleston, the obvious favorite. They show that not only are they the best in CISA, but one of the best in the country.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, College of Charleston, like we discussed last week, they're definitely a team on the rise, and they've got plenty of experience, great coaching, and that team should have no problem getting through, probably winning this event. And I know that their eyes are on bigger prizes towards the end of the year. The real question is who's going to get second, and typically it's kind of a battle between USF and Eckerd, and I think this year won't be much different than that. But I think the addition of Chris Stockey being on one team and the other team not quite having somebody of his caliber will push USF through into that second spot.
Yeah, I think you're right. USF also has the record to back that up so far this season, and to make matters worse for Eckerd, it's happening at USF, so they've got the home field advantage as well. So that should be a pretty quick and simple regatta. 3 competitive teams, and I'm not sure how many more will show up, but good luck to them. Moving up the coast, a much more interesting conference is Mesa. They're sailing their Prosser Trophy at Kings Point for 4 berths for nationals.
Yeah, it should be a really interesting regatta, Chris. I think, like we discussed last week, the top 2 teams I think are pretty clear, especially with the coming return of Nevin Snow, one of the best sailors in the country for Georgetown. I think Georgetown and St. Mary's are going to have a relatively easy time, probably qualifying first and second. As far as who wins, that could be kind of a scrap fight. And it's really the next 2 berths are really where it gets interesting. And I think Navy Navy probably shines a little bit amongst probably 3 or 4 teams that are fighting for those last 2 spots, but ODU has certainly shown some moments. And then I wouldn't be at all surprised if SUNY or Fordham, depending on conditions, were able to sneak in instead of one of those other 2 teams. If it's windy, both of those teams, they're basically from there. Kings Point is right across the water from where they all practice every day. And if it's windy and wavy and big current, that's what those 2 teams are built for. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if either SUNY or Fordham snuck in and got a berth to Team Race Nationals.
And if it's anything like this weekend, they were seeing gusts up to 40. They couldn't even sail on Saturday. It was so bad. So if there's a repeat for that, maybe that does equalize things a little bit. That'll be a good one to watch for that 4th place spot. I think we'll see none of those teams getting out without putting up a few losses to each other.
Certainly, Chris. One of the biggest things for that group of 4 is it's simple. It's a simple thing to say. It's a harder thing to do, but whoever has the cleanest record against the other 3 in that group of 4 is probably most likely going to be 3rd in the regatta and be a little more easy. Another dangerous thing is, the 2 other teams at this regatta that are certainly competitive are Hobart and George Washington, and it's most likely that those 2 teams are going to steal races from that group of 4 battling for the last 2 spots for nationals. And if you're one of those teams trying to get in, you got to make sure you beat those teams. If you start, racking up losses to those teams, then, it's going to be harder for sure.
All right, so that's the Prosser Trophy at Kings Point. Next, we've got the Fowl Trophy in Nisa. Certainly the deepest. I'm not sure if it's quite as centered on that 3rd and 4th spot. It's going to be a more competitive regatta across the board. We've got a lot of teams. We talked about last week how we've got sort of the separation. Yale and BC looking really good. No difference this past weekend. We've got Yale continuing their undefeated record. Boston College basically takes the weekend off for their top players, but we know they'll be strong. And then, as we said last week, we've got a lot of teams that are sort of finishing somewhere around the 500 mark at these most competitive regattas.
Yeah, Chris, it's going to be really interesting. And we spent a good bit of time on this topic last week, so we won't beat it to death. I think we were proven pretty right. I think the one thing that might be different is Harvard, 2nd weekend in a row, really, really strong performance. So that's a group of people that clearly have been building on this for a couple of years. They've got great coaching, and that's a veteran group that seems to be more prepared than we gave them credit at first. So maybe they're kind of separating themselves from that real kind of muddy pack right in the middle. But it's going to be a scrap fight for those back 2 spots, I think.
After a successful U.S. Team Race Championships last fall and a 5-city Southern swing this winter, the Zim 15 has again been selected for this year's championships. Designed specifically for college and post-college sailors, the skiff-like feel, carbon rig, and laminated sails make it a light air rocket which is easily depowered as the breeze builds. Contact Zim Sailing to order your new or charter Zim 15 today and have a blast sailing the circuit this summer.
While we are in Nisa, though, you can't help but notice that there is one team that is really looking forward to nationals, and that's Yale. They have barely lost a race all season long. They've lost a couple at each regatta, but getting the win, it looks like, I don't know if they've picked their team yet. They have been kind of bouncing back and forth between Malcolm Lamphere as their 3rd and Mitchell Kiss. This week they go with Malcolm Lamphere. It doesn't seem to matter, but these guys are looking really strong. The defending team race champs as well as the co-ed champs from 2014. So I thought it would be worth it for us to just take a minute to get to know one of their players a little bit better, their senior leader, Graham Landy. I caught up with him at spring break down at St. Mary's a few weeks ago as they were just gearing up. They had only done, I think, 2 regattas, just gearing up for this season. So this is an audio-only interview, but pretty interesting. Let's hear what he says.
Where do you see yourself in the team in terms of the role that you play, the leadership role or otherwise?
So I was captain from January of my junior year through January of this past year, but I'm no longer the captain. So it's kind of an odd role to fill now, being the senior who was the captain but is no longer. But I think right now it's nice for me because I maybe don't have a lot of logistical distractions from that, and I can focus a lot more on leading the team on the water and in practice from a purely sailing standpoint, and maybe less of a, relay between the coaches standpoint.
This sucks. There's no wind. But having you guys all here reminds me of last spring when you guys had Yale's, I think, probably one of the best spring nationals performances in the history of college sailing, going 2 out of 3 and getting second place at women's. What was that like to come off of, to return home after a week of being down here in Maryland and like realize what you guys had achieved in that year?
Yeah, I think it was pretty surreal for quite a while. I don't think it really even hit home until we got back to school and were able to see some of our friends who were really excited for us and maybe had a little bit more vested in like the success of a Yale athletic team. It's not too often for even our team or any team at the school to have any sort of success like that. There aren't really too many programs that are considered like a dynasty, and I think that performance was typical of a team that is quite dominant in its era. But it was just really enjoyable the whole time to see our team perform to its potential, and really we didn't have too much pressure on ourselves at the time. It didn't feel like we were really doing anything special, and then when we took a step back and realized that we'd just sailed the way that we know how to do it, resulted in a pretty dominant victory in both events that I competed in.
Does that change anything when you showed up this fall and went back to work with the team with a lot of the same personnel that had just done what you did last June?
I don't think so. I think it really just reinforced the coaching techniques and sort of the ideas that Zach and Bill are constantly talking about. It really just offered an example of how well it can work if we listen to our coaches and train the way that we know how to do. But there is a little bit of added pressure, I feel, to perform to that level again. But obviously you can't think about that because that sort of goes against our mindset of focusing on ourselves and just improving every day.
Even when you're in it and focused on today, do you still kind of benchmark last season or last year to what you're up against this year?
No, I try not to. It's pretty easy to understand that every day on the water is a little bit different, and you can't really compare one day to the other, and you really just have to focus on yourself and making sure that you're ticking all the boxes along the way to register a good performance at the end of the year.
Cool. So tell me about this team and this year. How is it going, and what are the what defines this year's sailing team?
Well, this team's a lot younger. Last year we lost a large group of seniors that, while many of them didn't often compete at the top level events until maybe their senior year, they were a really strong leadership force on the team their whole time there, just from more of like a social and practice aspect. So we've really missed having them, and it's been an adjustment to the new team dynamic of sort of a younger, more lively team that maybe takes a little bit more to rein in and focus at times, but that's a fun challenge. Being one of the older kids who sort of knows what it takes to succeed at a high level is trying to mold the team into something that can do that. The team racing has been quite fun so far. Last year it was pretty cut and dry who were going to be the 3 boats on the water competing, but this year we have Malcolm Lamphere and Mitchell Kiss who are joining the team race squad, and they both offer different talents, and so we're working through that right now to figure out which one will match up well with Ian and myself, but we're open to both of them, so it's been fun to watch them learn and progress at a really rapid rate in the early season. Fleet racing is, pretty similar. It's nice now you sort of get the warm-up with team racing and then before you have to move into any fleet racing. So we won't worry about that for the time being, too much at least.
Well, it was certainly a privilege for me to interview such a dynamic sailor. One thing that was not in that segment of the interview is the talk about some of the other sailing Graham's done, from the America's Cup to match racing around the world. And I think as he goes on, I know he's not looking for a sailing career, but watch this guy for the next several years to come. Probably he'll probably be cleaning up at regattas well into his old age.
Yeah, certainly Graham's one of the real bright talents that we have in this country, and even though you say he's not looking for a sailing career, there's probably plenty of people that would want to give him one. So we'll see how that goes. I thought the interview was really good, Chris. I thought you asked some good questions, and I think Graham's a really bright kid and he's super talented, and I think he was pretty spot on to kind of identify that this team, while super talented and it's easy to draw comparisons to last year's team, it's a younger team and the dynamics are totally different. But he seems keen on kind of taking on that challenge, and I think that's a sign of somebody who kind of understands the opportunity that they have for like great things, but also understands the hard work that it takes to get there.
Well, we'll have to pick that discussion back up later in the season as we look ahead to nationals, assuming Yale qualifies this weekend. And John, I'll see you next week as we see how we did on these predictions for Team Race Champs.
Two hands.